My hands were wrist-deep in soapy water, scrubbing the last of the dinner dishes, when my phone lit up on the counter. I dried my hands on the dish towel and glanced at the screen. It was a text from my mom. "Sweetie, Trevor and I are flying to Scottsdale tonight. We signed the listing agreement this afternoon. The agent says we can close in 4 weeks. We'll split whatever's left with you after fees. Grandma's in good hands. Kisses." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, walked to the kitchen window, and stood there looking out at the dark backyard for a long moment. Then I picked the phone back up and typed one message to my sister, Jenna. "It happened. Call me when you're alone. What you need to understand before any of this makes sense is what that house actually is. It isn't just a house. 219 Clearwater Drive is a 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow that my grandmother, Nora, bought with my late grandfather in 1974. She raised my mom there. My mom raised me and Jenna there, in that same house, after her divorce, when we had nothing else. The backyard has a peach tree my grandfather planted the year my mom was born. The floorboards in the hallway creak in a specific rhythm that I've known since I was 4 years old. My grandmother still lives there, at 76, with early-stage dementia that some days is barely noticeable and other days makes her call me by my mother's name and ask where her husband is. He has been gone for 11 years. My grandmother's one unwavering wish, the thing she has said out loud at every family dinner for the last decade, is that the house stays in the family. She has said it so many times it became a kind of joke, a gentle one, the way family traditions become jokes. "Nobody's selling this house while I'm breathing," she'd say, pointing her fork at whoever was closest. Everyone would laugh. Nobody ever thought it needed to be more than that. That was before my mom married Trevor. Trevor came into the picture about 3 years ago. He's charming in that specific, exhausting way that makes you feel like you're being sold something. He has very white teeth and strong opinions about wine and a timeshare in Cabo that he mentions in the first 15 minutes of any conversation. He retired early from something in commercial real estate, which meant he spent a lot of time explaining to the rest of us that we didn't understand how money worked. My mom fell hard and fast, and I tried to be happy for her. I genuinely did. But Jenna and I both noticed, quietly, between the two of us, that once Trevor was in the picture, my mom started spending less time at Grandma Nora's and more time on weekend trips and spa appointments and dinners at places where the entrees didn't have prices on the menu. They got married 14 months ago. Small ceremony. Nice enough? 6 months ago, my grandmother called me on a Tuesday afternoon, a little confused, and asked me to help her understand a document she'd received in the mail. I drove over that evening. It was a notarized form adding my mom and Trevor as joint tenants on the deed to 219 Clearwater Drive. My grandmother had signed it. She didn't remember signing it. When I asked my mom about it, she was breezy and reasonable in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. "It's just practical, sweetheart. If something happens to Mom, we don't want the house tied up in probate for a year. It makes the caregiving so much easier if we have legal standing." I didn't say anything then. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and thought for a long time. I am a paralegal. I have been one for 8 years, specializing in estate planning at a small firm downtown. I know what joint tenancy means. I know that with joint tenancy, if my grandmother passed away, the house would pass directly to my mom and Trevor, entirely bypassing whatever my grandmother's will said. I also know that joint tenancy means all 3 co-owners can sell the property if they agree. I know these things the way a nurse knows what a particular medication does. Quietly. Specifically, without having to look it up. My grandmother's will, which I had helped her update 2 years earlier with one of the attorneys at my firm, left the house equally to me and Jenna, with the explicit instruction that it was not to be sold for at least 10 years, to give us time to decide together what we wanted to do with it. That will, now, meant almost nothing. The deed change had effectively cut us out. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept coming back to the same question. Was this carelessness, or was it a plan? I started paying closer attention after that. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you could dismiss if you were trying to. My mom started coming by the house more often, which on the surface seemed like a good thing, more help with Grandma Nora. But she was always there when I wasn't. Jenna mentioned that on 2 separate occasions, she'd arrived to find Trevor walking through the rooms with what she described as a looking around energy. Not visiting, assessing. He'd commented on the square footage. He'd mentioned, casually, that the neighborhood had appreciated significantly. Then came the afternoon I stopped by unannounced and found my mom sitting at the kitchen table with a woman I didn't recognize. There were papers spread between them. My mom swept them together quickly when I walked in, but not before I caught the letterhead. It was from a local real estate agency. The woman was introduced to me as just an old friend. Old friends don't bring listing paperwork to kitchen tables. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday evening about 3 weeks before that text message arrived. I was at the house helping Grandma Nora with her medications when I found her sitting on the edge of her bed holding a piece of paper, looking at it with an expression I can only describe as bewildered. She held it out to me. It was an estimate, a pre-listing home inspection, already completed, for 219 Clearwater Drive. The date on it was from 5 days earlier. There was a handwritten note at the top in my mom's handwriting. Repairs before listing priority items. My grandmother looked up at me. "What does listing mean?" she asked. "Is someone coming to look at the house?" I kept my voice even. "Don't worry about it, Grandma. I'll take care of it." I folded the paper and put it in my bag. My hands were completely steady. Inside, something had gone very cold and very quiet, the way it does when you stop being surprised and start being clear. I drove straight to my firm the next morning before anyone else arrived. I sat down with the senior estate attorney, a woman named Carol, who I have worked beside for 6 years and trust completely. I laid out everything: the deed change, the inspection, the real estate agent, the text I had been expecting and had not yet received. Carol listened without interrupting. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what they're planning to do?" "I know exactly what they're planning to do," I said. We spent the next 2 hours building a case. Here's what I had in my favor. I had helped my grandmother execute a durable power of attorney 2 years earlier, naming me as her agent for financial and legal decisions in the event that she was unable to make them herself. The power of attorney had been drafted by our firm, signed before a notary, and was entirely valid. My grandmother's dementia diagnosis, while still in early stages, was documented by her neurologist. That documentation meant that any contracts she had signed in the past 6 months were potentially voidable on the grounds that she may not have had full capacity at the time of signing, including the deed change. What I did not have was time. If my mom and Trevor had already engaged a listing agent and were 4 weeks from closing, I needed to move carefully and quickly. I could not tip them off. If they knew what I was doing, they could accelerate the timeline or find ways to complicate my challenge. I needed them to keep moving forward, confident and unaware, right up until the moment the ground disappeared under them. So I let them keep moving. I did not call my mom. I did not confront Trevor. I did not say a single word about the inspection report or the listing agent or any of it. When my mom texted me cheerful updates about the exciting next chapter she and Trevor were planning in Arizona, I responded with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. While she was doing that, I was working. Carol filed a formal challenge to the deed modification on the grounds of potential incapacity at time of signing. That challenge was recorded with the county recorder's office, which meant a title search would flag it immediately. Any title company handling a sale of that property would find it the moment they ran the search. Simultaneously, I contacted my grandmother's neurologist and requested a formal written assessment of her cognitive status at the time of the deed signing. The doctor was thorough, careful, and unequivocal. Based on the progression of her diagnosis, there was meaningful doubt about her capacity to understand the legal implications of a deed change at that time. Carol also called the listing agent's brokerage directly. She did not threaten or make accusations. She simply informed them, in writing, that there was an active legal challenge to the ownership of the property and that any transaction proceeding without resolution of that challenge would expose all parties to significant liability. She carbon copied the title company she suspected they would use, because in this city, real estate is a small world, and certain agencies always use the same title companies. I went home that evening and made spaghetti for dinner and watched television and went to bed at 10. I slept fine. The night before, what was supposed to be the closing, my phone rang at 11:30. I was still awake, reading. I looked at the screen. My mom. I let it ring. Then I picked up on the 4th ring and said, "Hi, Mom." Her voice was sharp in a way I had never heard from her before. Not upset. Furious. "What did you do?" "I protected Grandma's house," I said. My voice was completely level. "What are you talking about?" "The title company called Trevor today. There's a legal challenge on the property. The closing is on hold. The agent is saying we may have to cancel the listing entirely." She paused, and in the silence I could hear Trevor saying something in the background, low and clipped. "How could you do this to us? We had a plan. We had a buyer lined up. Do you know how much work we have put into this?" I want to tell you that I felt something big in that moment. Triumph, or vindication, or anger finally breaking the surface. but I mostly just felt tired in a way that had been building for months. I thought about Grandma Nora sitting on her bed holding that inspection report, asking me in her soft, confused voice what listing meant. I thought about Jenna, who had cried on the phone when I told her what was happening. A quiet, gutted kind of crying that I have only heard from her a handful of times in our whole lives. "Mom," I said, "you had Grandma sign a document that she didn't understand and didn't remember signing. You had an inspector walk through her home without telling her what it was for. You were 4 weeks from selling the house she has lived in for 50 years, the house she has asked you, at every single family dinner for 10 years, to keep in this family. And you did all of it without saying a word to me or Jenna." Silence. "We were going to split the proceeds," she said, but the certainty had gone out of her voice. "Grandma's will leaves the house to me and Jenna," I said. "You knew that. That's why you changed the deed, because you knew you couldn't get to it any other way." More silence. I heard Trevor's voice again, closer this time, urgent. "We need that money," my mom said, and something in the way she said it made me go still. Not angry, just still. "What do you mean you need it?" What came out over the next 10 minutes was something that Carol would later describe, with professional understatement, as a complicated financial picture. Trevor's early retirement had not been as voluntary as advertised. There were debts. The timeshare was underwater. There were credit cards. There was a personal loan from 18 months ago that had been paying the interest on an older personal loan. The Arizona plan was not a lifestyle upgrade. It was an escape route. The equity in my grandmother's house, roughly $380,000 after fees, was the only number that made their math work. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "That is not Grandma Nora's problem. She's not going to be here forever," my mom said, and her voice had gone flat in a way that I will not forget. "She doesn't even know what the house is worth. What difference does it make to her?" I have thought about that sentence a lot since then, the specific coldness of it, the way it reduced my grandmother, a woman who planted tomatoes in that backyard every summer until 2 years ago, who taught me to make pie crust in that kitchen, who slow danced with my grandfather in that living room at my parents' wedding, to a problem of timing. She doesn't even know what the house is worth, as if not knowing the market value of something means you don't love it, as if confusion is the same as not caring. "I'm going to call you tomorrow," I said. "We'll talk about next steps." I hung up and sat in my quiet apartment for a long time. I called Jenna. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake waiting. I told her everything, start to finish, the challenge, the title, hold, the phone call. I told her what Mom had said about Grandma not knowing what the house was worth. There was a pause on Jenna's end that lasted long enough that I asked if she was still there. "I'm here," she said. "I just needed a second." We talked for 2 hours. By the time we hung up, we knew what we wanted. Carol and I spent the next week preparing 2 folders. Folder 1, the full documentation of the deed challenge and its legal basis, the neurologist's assessment, the timeline of the listing agreement, cross-referenced with Grandma Nora's documented medical appointments, showing her condition during that period. Carol's certified letter to the brokerage. The title hold. Everything neat, chronological, indexed. Folder 2, a proposed agreement. Jenna and I would not pursue the deed challenge in court, which would be expensive and slow and hard on Grandma Nora. We would not file a formal complaint against my mom with the state bar, which Carol had noted was an option given her involvement in potentially facilitating a questionable deed transfer. We would not pursue Trevor for anything related to the inspection or the premature listing. In exchange for all of that, my mom and Trevor would sign a quitclaim deed transferring their interest in the property back to Grandma Nora. We would simultaneously have Grandma Nora execute a new transfer on death deed, prepared by our firm, naming me and Jenna as the sole beneficiaries, with a no-sale restriction for 15 years. They would be asked to cover the legal fees for the corrective work, which were not insignificant, and they would not contact Grandma Nora's estate planning attorney, her bank, or any financial institution connected to her care, for any reason, without my written consent as her power of attorney. Option 2 was that they declined, the challenge proceeded, and Carol filed a capacity-based petition to have the original deed change voided by a court. That process would become public record. It would involve Trevor's name appearing in filings related to a potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Whatever remained of his professional reputation in commercial real estate, a field where this kind of thing has a very long memory, would take the impact. We met at Carol's office on a Thursday afternoon. My mom and Trevor sat on one side of the table, Carol and I sat on the other. Jenna, because she lives 2 states away, joined by video on Carol's laptop. I slid the 2 folders across the table without preamble. Trevor read folder 2 first. He is a man who has spent his career in negotiation, and I watched him work through the options with a kind of professional efficiency, his face doing very little. Then he read folder 1. His face did a few more things during that part. My mom read it more slowly. When she got to the neurologist's assessment of Grandma Nora's capacity at the time of the deed signing, she stopped and sat very still for a moment. I watched her throat move. "We didn't mean to," she started. "Which option?" I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. She looked at me for a long time. I have known my mother's face my whole life. I know the particular way her expression shifts when she is about to say something she knows is inadequate. She made that shift. Then she stopped. Then she picked up the pen and signed the quitclaim deed. Trevor signed it 90 seconds later without speaking. We filed the corrective paperwork the same afternoon. The new transfer on death deed was executed the following week, on a bright Tuesday morning, in Grandma Nora's living room, with afternoon light coming through the windows she has had for 30 years. Grandma Nora wore the blue cardigan she wears for occasions she considers important. She signed her name in the careful, deliberate way she's had to adopt since her hands began to shake a little, and then she looked up at me and said, perfectly clearly, "Good. Now nobody can touch it." She has good days and harder days. That was a very good day. The legal fees came to $4,200, which my mom and Trevor paid by certified check 3 weeks later. The peach tree bloomed this past March. Jenna drove in for the weekend, and the two of us sat on the back porch on Saturday afternoon with Grandma Nora between us, watching the branches move in the wind. Grandma Nora told us a story about the year the tree produced so many peaches that she and my grandfather made 27 jars of preserves and ran out of places to put them. She told it in perfect detail, unhurried, her voice warm and entirely present. I have heard versions of that story before, but I listened to every word. My mom texted me the following month. She and Trevor had worked out a repayment arrangement with his creditors. They were going to be okay. She said she was sorry. The text was 6 lines long, careful, and clearly revised several times. I did not answer it right away. I sat with it for a few days, and then I wrote back that I appreciated her saying it, and that the door was open, slowly, carefully, in time. I meant it, I think. I am still working out what I mean. But here is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that feels most true when I think about all of it. Protecting someone is not the same as punishing someone. I did not do what I did because I wanted my mom to lose. I did it because Grandma Nora is still here, still on that porch, still telling the story about the peach preserves, and that house is still hers, and the floorboards in the hallway still creak in the same rhythm I have known since I was 4 years old. That is what I was trying to protect. That is what I protected. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is refuse to let the wrong people decide what it's worth.